Hello, everybody. My name is Amanda Gorman, and I'm the inaugural Youth Poet Laureate of the United States. And I'm so excited to be here with you beginning the SCG Annual Conference for 2020. Today, I'm going to be talking a bit about poetry and creativity and how these both can be utilized to create real social change. Now, I get this question a lot, which is what exactly is a Youth Poet Laureate? I myself had to clarify it for myself and my family when I got the title. But basically, a poet laureate is a type of ambassador or representative for poetry and literature in the region. Typically, this type of person tends to be at the latter half of their career. They are established, they tend to be a bit older. But with the Youth Poet Laureate, it is a position in which somebody who is young can actually occupy that same position and go about making similar change. For me, what being Youth Poet Laureate of the United States has meant is a plethora of different things and a variety of activations that I do to make social change. It can be performing poetry at a protest or a march, or at the top of the Empire State Building, or discussing poetry and race on the Kelly Clarkson show. It can look like a whole cornucopia of things. But what surprises people is when I tell them that actually I began as someone who was terrified of speaking when I grew up and who was horrified at the thought of having to perform in front of other people. When I was a child, I had a speech impediment, which meant that I had a very difficult time pronouncing various letters in the alphabet, such as sh or ch, or the R sound, which was the hardest. And alongside that came this horror that if I spoke up, I would be judged by the sound of my voice. And so I kept myself silent. But as I continued to grow up and as I discovered poetry and began writing and expressing myself in the written word, I began experiencing the magic as well of the spoken word, which then came with this deeper understanding that it didn't matter about how I sounded when I spoke up. What really mattered was what I was speaking up for, and that took precedence. On that topic, I'm going to read a short poem that I wrote around 4 years ago. In my poetry, I try to focus as much as possible on socio-political and environmental issues. I know there's this type of stereotype and idea that poets, particularly if they're old, dead white men, are writing about nature or a wheelbarrow and these types of picturesque ambient environments, which are all fine. But I, as an intersectional Black feminist, when I'm writing, I think all those things are great, but I think my poetry can do so much more when it's speaking about issues of the now and issues that matter in people's lives. This poem, We the People, as I mentioned, I wrote 4 years ago. This was around the time in which when things were really tectonically shifting in the American landscape. So we just had the 2016 election, DACA had been rescinded, and there was so much uncertainty and doubt, and this idea of what is my country becoming? And when I thought about the terminology of we the people that comes from the Declaration of Independence, I was thinking it was time to get really specific about who we the people means, because for so long it's kind of been utilized as a misnomer where we the people is actually exclusivist, meaning all man is created equal, actually excluded my ancestors and women and Native Americans and so many other people when it was written. And so this poem was an attempt to speak back to that language and using words to put marginalized people at the forefront of what it means to be a people and what it means to be American. This poem, again, We the People. We, the people, live in a less than perfect union that accuses the vulnerable and the never top class and race. When children are illegal and intolerance bans humans, I wonder who we, the people, are in the first place. We, the people, meant all lives matter, but are white lives living a coincidence when, if you're not male or pale, you get destroyed for demonstrating dissidence? When the color of his skin gives a killer assumed innocence, but still we will rise up, advocate, and activate with the people's diligence. Let's speak names to we the people, so they are not lost in executive orders lines. Protect them from prick of tweet, pen, bullet, or steeple. Sturdier signs to keep making the signs and reading the signs. It's hectic, apocalyptic. They're skeptics, but we can be united. For what makes America great is diversity and democracy reignited. In excitements, they call for an indictment, but I think 4 years are far too far-sighted. What can the enlightened do now for the blighted so wrongs are righted? We, the people, are brave enough to love this country's creed. We, the people, love this country enough to question its misdeeds. We, the people, question enough to build upon this foundation. We, the people, erect an improved hilltop of a nation, indivisible by where we come from or who we are born. We, the people, are those who let freedom ring, so that no matter how we love, talk, pray, or mourn, this America, too, is ours to build and ours to sing. Thank you. Like I said, writing that poem was really about utilizing poetry as a weapon for speaking back and forth with resistance and thinking about collectively how we can make social change and making that movement as intersectional and as welcoming as possible. The next poem I'm going to read, I wrote much later, much more recently. This one was actually probably 2 months ago. It was around June and July of this year when I'm sure all of you in some way or form were impacted or influenced or learning about the Black Lives Matter movement. And as the protests and the riots were going on, and I was discussing, this real tectonic shift with people, what seemed in part incomprehensible from people who were non-Black was the level of rage and exhaustion that was felt on the part of the Black community. And I wanted to re-examine what that rage meant and to not sanitize it and not deodotize it, but to say, is there a place and time, which I think now is it, where this rage is righteous, where it is embedded and rooted in a real historical understanding of the wrongs that have been committed and what needs to be done to move forward. But I also thought it would be unfair and incomplete, if not incorrect, to paint a poetic picture of the Black Lives Matter movement just as categorized by rage or anger or something that was reactionary. In fact, I think both the Black Lives Matter movement and the Civil Rights movement in themselves, their genesis actually comes from a lot of hope and a lot of faith that things can and should be better. It takes that type of, I dare say, audacity of hope to continue to show up, to continue to march, to continue to fight after hundreds and hundreds of years of oppression. And I wanted that type of faith and that type of strong bone of will to also shine through. So this is called Fury and Faith. You will be told that this is not a problem, at least not your problem. You will be told now is not the time for change to begin, told that we cannot win. But the point of protest isn't winning. It's holding fast to the promise of freedom, even when fast victory is not promised. Meaning we cannot stand up to police if we cannot cease policing our own imagination, convincing our communities that this won't work when the work hasn't even begun, that this can wait when we've already waited out 1,000 suns. By now, we understand that white supremacy and the despair it demands are as destructive as any disease. So when you're told that your rage is reactionary, remind yourself that rage is our right. It teaches us it's time to fight in the face of injustice. Not only is rage natural, but necessary. because it helps carry us to a destination. Our goal is never revenge, just restoration, not dominance, just dignity, not fear, just freedom, just justice. Whether we prevail is not determined by all the challenges that are present, but by all the change that is possible. And though we are unstoppable, if we ever feel like we might fail, if we be fatigued and frail when our fire can no longer be fueled by fury, we will always be fortified by this faith found in the anthem, the vow, all Black lives matter, no matter what. Black lives are worth living, worth defending, worth every struggle. We owe it to the fallen to fight, but we owe it to ourselves to never stay kneeling when the day calls us to stand together. We envision a land that is liberated, not lawless. We create a future that is free, not flawless. Again and again, over and over, we will stride up every mountainside, magnanimous and modest. We will be protected and served by a force that is honored and honest. This is more than protest. It's a promise. Thank you. That was Fury and Faith. Now, as I look back on my career and what it means to be a poet, particularly at this time, I try to remind people of the place that words have now, regardless of the fact of whether you are a writer. I think that in the historical moments that call us to be something larger and bigger and better than ourselves, those moments are often communicated vis-a-vis poetry. For example, I ask people, why is it that there's a poem at the base of the Statue of Liberty instead of, let's say, a paragraph? And obviously there's, a historical answer to that, but I also think there's a symbolic one, which is to say, those times in which history, life, society feels dark, and wants to call its people to stand on a history, but also to stand for a future, poetry is always right alongside there. For example, another question I have is for people to look around the next time they're at a protest and to see what types of flyers and banners they see. And most often than not, a lot of those battle cries will be in the form of language and poetry. One of my favorite is, "They buried us, but they didn't know we were seeds." The frontal place of a metaphor in the movement is incredible, which tells me that regardless of whether we're a poet laureate or a writer or a published author, the words that we use to describe ourselves in the future that we want collectively matters every day. And it has so much power than maybe we even yet realize. And that power, I think, is particularly transposed and shared through the work of philanthropists and grant makers. I would never be the wordsmith I am today if it had not been for the access I had to poetry that was given to me by nonprofits who'd gotten local grants from Southern California. Growing up, I participated every Saturday in high school at a very small writer's workshop in Beyond Baroque in Venice. It was 5 people, but having that type of space and having that type of support to do that meant that a young Black girl with a speech impediment in Los Angeles could find her voice in poetry. Again, in high school, I had access to a phenomenal nonprofit called Right Girl, in which they partnered young teen girls with a published author, and the two would work in tandem to publish the work, edit the work, et cetera, et cetera. And that gave me, one, a lifelong mentor who I still love to this day, but also a direct ladder and support network to get into Harvard and to go there and to learn. That is to say, words matter, and the way that we spread the power of knowledge and the power of people is through the act of giving. There is no more significant act than that. And so as you leave my session and continue through the rest of the day, I want you to think of daily acts and collective acts of giving as the magic that they are, and try to think about the history that you stand on and the future that you stand for with every act of paying yourself forward to something else. Thank you so much for joining me, and have a great rest of your day. Bye.